Wache ani sakoli kia kulamalsi. Hello, welcome everyone. It's great to see so many people coming out today to hear from our guests from all sorts of different places. Before I begin and introduce our invited guests and presenters to today's session, I would like to take a moment to introduce myself and acknowledge the land and territory that the organizers of this event join you from. Wabangeezis Nindishnakazam, Muskego Inuit Peterbeck, Cochrane, London, and Tonchi. My name is Candace Burnett DeBosque. I'm an Indigenous Cree scholar, assistant professor in the Faculty of Education, and a teaching fellow here at Western University. Western is located along the banks of the beautiful Deshkan-Zibing, the Antler River. These are lands belonging to the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape people, lands connected to treaty, Sombra, London Township Treaty, as well as the Longwoods Treaties, and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. Today's event is brought to you through a partnership between Western Weldon Library, and I just want to thank them for agreeing to work on this event with us. We collaborated, myself as a teaching fellow, and with the support of the Office of Indigenous Initiatives, we came together to bring this event to you. I want to recognize Emily Carlisle Johnson and Cindy Graham for their efforts behind the scene. They put a lot of time and energy into this, and it would not be possible without them. This event coalesces around a really important topic: the rights of Indigenous communities to determine the use of their knowledges and data that exists in colonial archives like museums, university libraries, and education systems. To help us learn more about this topic, we've invited three very special guests from the Local Context Hub to present to us. Local Context is an initiative that intervenes in the structural colonialism that's embedded in our archival systems and asserts Indigenous people's voices, rights, and interests in data collections and reorganizing and relabeling Indigenous knowledges. This topic is an area of learning for me personally, and I'm really excited to learn more, and I know many of us here at Western University are as well. I hope that this is the beginning of many more conversations around this topic as we, at Western, support decolonial change. So we have three special guests with us today. I am going to read a little bit about their bios, but I know they're going to do some self-location as well. We have Dr. Janette Hamilton Pearce. Janette is from the Te Whānau-Ā-Āpanui iwi in Aotearoa, New Zealand. She is the Local Context Program Lead, and Dr. Hamilton Pearce has a PhD with over 20 years of experience as an academic in information systems for Indigenous communities. Janette works at the Te Katahi Research Institute at the University of Waikato on the homelands of the Taiawini. She specializes in supporting Indigenous communities in managing their intellectual and cultural property rights and information and data within information systems. We have Felicia Garcia. Felicia Garcia is a member of the Santa Ynez Band of Chumash Indians. She is the Local Context Community Outreach Manager, and her role is to support Indigenous communities in using the traditional knowledge and bicultural labels that they'll talk to us about today and accessing the newly launched Local Context Hub. Felicia has a BA in psychology from Willamette University and an MA in museum studies from New York University. And her master's thesis, which it really intrigues me actually, it focuses on the need for Indigenous land acknowledgements in US museums and led to the development of a guide for land acknowledgements. We might have to have a conversation later. Corrie Rowe is our final guest. Corrie is the Local Context Institution Outreach Manager. Her role is to support staff at research institutions in collecting and applying these traditional knowledge and bicultural notices. She earned a BA in anthropology from the University of Vermont and an MA in museum studies from New York University. And her roles in cultural and arts institutions in Lenape-Woking, New York, have involved project management, community building and support, and collections and exhibition research and management. We are so grateful to the three of you. I know we're going to learn a lot. We are recording today's session for those of you who might have noticed that, and we will be able to share that with participants after today's session if you're interested. Before I pass on the floor to the guests, I just want to encourage everyone to use the chat feature. You can add questions that may come up along the way. And my colleague, Stephen Spong, the director of the law library here at Western and the copyright officer for Western, will join us towards the end. There he is. Hi, Stephen. He will join us at the end and facilitate a Q&A. So he will be looking specifically at that chat feature for the questions. So without further ado, let's pass it over to the presenters today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Candice. Ngā mihi atu ki a koe. I just wanted to, tēnā koutou katoa. I just wanted to thank the Office of Indigenous Initiatives and Western Libraries as part of the Indigenous Teaching Fellow Series for having us present on local context, really supporting Indigenous rights and interest in data and collections. So our thanks to Candice, Cindy, Emily, Ariel and Stephen for helping us to really organise this presentation. Local context really acknowledges the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Luna, Pewak and Atuana peoples and pay our respects to them, their culture and their elders past, present and future. He karakia mō tātou, ko rangi nei ki runga, ko papatua naku ki raro, ka puta ki te whai au ki te ao marama tihei mauri ora. The next screen shows the overview, introductions from Felicia, Corrie and I, local context and background information. What we're going to do is also look at local context and how the problem that local context really tries to solve. Very briefly, we discuss the intellectual property to licenses to labels and what the differences are. Felicia's going to look at the labels and Corey's going to be looking at the notices. And both Corrie and Felicia will do the hub demonstrations where we finish off with questions and answers and who to contact to learn more. So yes, Candice talked about if there are any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. In the chat though, Corey's going to put a bit.ly link to these presentation slides. You can open them up and that will help with the slides as well as extra information during the slides. So let us know if you get access to those links, if you've got access to those links, any alt text in there, and Corey's put that into the chat right now. Oh, and Felicia, sorry. Felicia's put that in the chat right now. So the next slide, who am I? Ko tauira mai tawhiti te waka, ko pahawa te marae, ko te Whānau-Ā-Āpanui te iwi, nō reira ko Janette Hamilton Pearce. So I'm from te Whānau-Ā-Āpanui iwi on the east coast of the North Island of Aotearoa, New Zealand. My marae is Pahawa, which is a meeting house, and I want to acknowledge my whānau who support me continuously every single day to do what I do. So there's my mum June, husband Grant, children Atarita and Te Pere, and my granddaughter Maya. So in this photo we are building a new home on our ancestral lands, which I know we are deeply privileged to have that opportunity. So I pay my respects to our people, past, present and future, on the homelands upholding our sovereignty and self-determination, and I'm absolutely grateful that we are able to build a home on our lands. In 2009, I got my doctorate from Auckland University of Technology, Manawahine and Information Technology, and I work for the Te Kotahi Research Institute at the University of Waikato on the homelands of the Waikato Tainui iwi. After 21 years in the background of information systems for Indigenous communities, I'm really excited that I came across local context. It was a dream really to start looking at information technology for Indigenous peoples in this way, and the cultural authority of how local context looks at data, information and knowledge for Indigenous communities. I'm the local context program lead, recognising the inherent sovereignty that Indigenous communities really have over knowledge, data, and that comes from our lands, our territories, our airspace and waters. So I specialise in supporting Indigenous communities and managing intellectual and cultural property rights and data within information systems. Local context really does this work, research and training through the traditional knowledge and biocultural labels and the notices as digital markers that can be accessed through the information system called the Local Context Hub. This is what we're going to be talking about today. Firstly, though, I'll pass it over to Felicia to introduce herself.
Thank you, Janette. Haku matuka Felicia Garcia, Samala Chumash no ni alapu lapu ni Castro iti. Hi, I'm Felicia Garcia. I am Samala Chumash from San Ynez, California, and I'm very happy to be here with you all today. Thank you so much for having us. On the top there is a photo of my beautiful homelands. That is our sacred mountain, Whānau-Ā-Āpanui. And before we begin, I also would like to acknowledge the Tewa peoples, who are the original stewards of the land on which I have the great privilege to live and work and give this presentation from today. I want to acknowledge their withstanding connection to this place, Okopogiawinge, which means White Shell Water Place, also known as Santa Fe, New Mexico. I invite you to join me in paying respect to the Tewa elders of the past and present, as well as living descendants and future generations who will continue to maintain inseparable ties to this place, which is pictured there on the bottom left. And then I just wanted to talk briefly about how I came to become the community outreach manager of Local Context. As Candace mentioned, I developed a guide to Indigenous land acknowledgement specifically for cultural institutions and museums in particular. And I did that work when I was working on my MA in Museum Studies at New York University. There's a picture of me at my graduation with my mom and my grandma on the bottom right. And while I was developing the guide, I worked very closely with Local Context co-director and professor in NYU's Museum Studies Department, Dr. Jane Anderson. And since graduating, I have continued to do related independent scholarship, but over the last few years, the question that I and so many others have been asking related to land and territory acknowledgements is, what comes next? How can museums and other institutions demonstrate a true, meaningful commitment to decolonization that goes beyond land acknowledgement? And I think that the Local Context labeling system is just one example of, what that next step could be. And so that's how I came to be a part of this amazing team doing this work. And on to Corrie.
Thanks, Felicia, and thank you again for Western University for having us today, and to everybody who's here or watching the recording, and we really appreciate it. So my name is Corrie Rowe. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a settler in Turtle Island. I'm coming to you today from what is known as Connecticut, outside New York City, on the homelands of the Paugussett and Wappinger nations. And I'd like to pay my respects to the ancestors and to the present and future generations of this land. So the photos that you see here on this slide are from where I live with my partner and our dog in the woods. And this map is a screenshot from Native Land Digital or native-land.ca, which shows the Indigenous lands who I've lived on throughout my life. Like Felicia, I'm based out of New York University as the Local Context Institution Outreach Manager. So again, I'm here to help staff at non-Indigenous institutions use the Local Context system. And also just to talk a little bit about how I've come to this role. I come to this work after studying anthropology at the University of Vermont, and then museum studies in Felicia's class at New York University. And since my undergraduate studies, I've been interested in museums and how they codify a particular representation of culture, and one that will always reflect the people who have contributed to museums, past and present. And as I've pursued my further studies and worked for institutions, it's become even more clear for the change that's needed in the field as well as adjacent fields, especially as museums have consistently been identified in studies as being a highly trusted institution. And just to point to a great initiative, Latanya S. Autry and Mike Morawski have stated in their hashtag movement, museums are not neutral. I believe that for museums and adjacent fields to truly move towards justice, equity, and inclusion, they need to transparently acknowledge their violent, their colonial and racist histories, and how these have continued into the present. So now I'm going to hand it over to Janette to talk a little bit more about local context.
Thank you, Corrie. So some background information: that local context was developed by Jane Anderson and Kim Kristen in 2010, and since then have been joined by Maui Hudson of the Waikato University and the Whakatohea Nation, and James Francis Sr. of the Penobscot Nation. They are the 4 local context directors. But since 2019, Jane and Maui have developed Enrich, Equity for Indigenous Research and Innovation Coordinating Hub that really enhances local context into the fields of Indigenous intellectual and cultural property rights and Indigenous data sovereignty. We're not going over those today, but really that's what the wider context is. So on the next slide, you can see the wonderful local context team all over the world, from New York to here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And we're really grateful for the amazing talent and skills that our team has to contribute to this field. I do want to pay our respects to a friend who has passed away just recently, Miriam Barbridge, who want to pay tribute to her in her outstanding service in the Indigenous design sector, where she shared her passions of being Indigenous, of being Māori and a woman. We send our love to her family at this sad time. Moi mai rā e hoa, haere atu rā. Aroha kia koe, aio kia koe. Haere atu rā, Miriam. Haere, haere, haere atu rā. On the next screen, you will see that local context wants to solve a specific problem. Really held in large institutions such as museums, libraries, science research institutions and universities are enormous archives and collections of Indigenous communities' cultural heritage, knowledge and data. So this data and information and knowledge really held within these institutes have missing provenance, attribution about the Indigenous communities it belongs to. In addition, Indigenous communities are not seen as the legal rights holders because the copyright will be attributed to the collection owners and researchers who collected the data, information or knowledge from Indigenous communities. So through information systems, this collection and the ownership practice of extracting Indigenous communities' knowledge is growing really extensive than ever before. Therefore, this practice and the issues of ownerships really is a huge problem. But alongside this, provenance is not clearly made, mistakes in the information go unchallenged, and will perpetuate through the digital life of the data and information, where it gets shared from one place to another in a fraction of a second. The knowledge that is extracted from this information represents Indigenous communities incorrectly, but is seen somehow as truth. So local context is one step to help solve these problems. On the next slide, I really mentioned that ownership of copyright is given to collection owners and is primarily concerned with the collection as a whole, not what is in the collection itself or the content or the context. Creative Commons, though, provides free licenses, giving permission to others to make their work available to the public. Copyright and Creative Commons are both legal structures based on a property lens for individuals, also focusing at the whole of information being more important as opposed to the content or context of the information. Therefore, collective ownership and looking at the content level for Indigenous communities is really problematic within both structures. Local context moves beyond copyright and Creative Commons as an extra legal practice using traditional knowledge and biocultural labels to establish Indigenous cultural authority on a collective basis and a specific content basis. the labels come from Indigenous communities themselves. Felicia's up next to really help to discuss what the traditional knowledge labels are.
Thank you, Janette. Local Context offers a digital labeling system that was developed with Indigenous communities and designed to promote Indigenous data sovereignty. The traditional knowledge, or TK labels, which you can see here, communicate, or what they communicate is consistent with pre-existing community protocols around the use and circulation of knowledge. These digital markers were created to exist alongside collections that currently live outside of Indigenous communities to indicate Indigenous rights and interests in those collections. Further, this labeling system is grounded in the recognition of the inherent sovereignty that Indigenous communities have over knowledge and data that comes from their lands, territories, and waters. And Janette already mentioned this, but I think it's important to emphasize that these labels are extra legal, and so this project is really about relationships, and it requires institutions to have a genuine interest in respecting these inherent rights of Indigenous people. The label icons, which you can see here, are not to be altered, and this is to ensure national and international recognition across different contexts, such as collections management systems, online repositories, websites, and within physical exhibit spaces. The TK label text, however, which I will show some examples of in just a moment, is intended to be customized by each community, giving the label specificity and context. The customization of labels is an expression of Indigenous sovereignty. The title of each TK label, which you can see below the icon there. Oh, sorry, are people able to see me in the chat? I'm seeing a message in the chat that maybe it's not working. Presenters, does it look okay to you? Okay.
Yeah, you look good.
Thank you. Just want to make sure everyone can see what's on the screen here. And so just picking up where I stopped there, the TK label text is meant to be customized, and it can also be translated into one or more languages and displayed in addition to the default label title, which is below there. And these labels can be used and applied either within an Indigenous community or in collaboration with external institutions and or researchers using the local context hub, which Corrie and I will demo later. And if we go to the next slide, I will talk about what the labels communicate. There are 20 traditional knowledge labels and 10 biocultural labels. Janette will provide more information about the biocultural labels later in the presentation. Both types of labels are grouped into these three categories based on what they communicate. On the top row there are the protocol or the provenance labels, which identify the group or subgroup, which is the primary cultural authority for the material and or recognizes the subgroup or recognizes other interests in the material. Below that are the protocol labels, which outline traditional protocols associated with access to the material and invite viewers to respect community protocols. And then on the bottom, there are the permission labels, which indicate which activities the community has approved and is generally acceptable. Other use requires direct engagement with the primary cultural authorities. And I have an example of one label from each category on the next slide. So on the top left, there is the TK attribution label, which is a provenance label. Below that is the TK culturally sensitive label, which is a protocol label. And then on the right is the TK outreach label, which is from the permissions category. And if you go to our website, which is linked in that bit.ly link we shared earlier, you can see all of these descriptions and label icons. And I won't go through each of the descriptions here, but I will just share what we have to say about the attribution label. So for each label, there is some information about why you might use that particular label. And for the attribution label, it states that it should be used when you would like anyone who uses this material to know who the correct sources, custodians, or owners are. This is especially useful if this material has been wrongly attributed or important names of the people involved in the making of the material or safeguarding the material are missing. This label allows you to correct historical mistakes in terms of naming and acknowledging the legitimate authorities for this material. This label asks future users to also apply the correct names and attribution. And with each label, we offer a template text, which of course can be customized and translated by each community. But the template text for attribution states that this label is being used to correct historical mistakes or exclusions pertaining to this material. This is especially in relation to the names of the people involved in performing or making this work, and or correctly naming the community from which it originally derives. As a user, you are being asked to apply the correct attribution in any future use of this work. And on the next slide, we have an example of this particular label in practice. This is on the Scowlitz Nation's website. And I've clicked on the attribution label, but if you can look on the top right there on their website, they have 4 labels that are in use throughout the site. Those are attribution, TK non-commercial, TK outreach, and TK verified. And then if you were to go to their website and look at some other pages within, you would notice that there are some other labels in use throughout, but these 4 labels remain at the top of the page to guide visitors on proper use of the website and the knowledge shared on their platform. And so because I shared what our template text states for TK attribution, I also wanted to share the customized attribution text that was developed by the Scowlitz tribe, because I think it's a really great comparison that shows potential applications of this label. So their label states, this website represents the true knowledge and history of Scowlitz people. The attribution literally means name and place in our language. We ask everyone that visits this site to attribute our knowledge and histories to us, the Scowlitz people, a tribe of Stolo. Our history has not always been respected or told correctly. Here we tell our own story in our own words. We are both holders and caretakers of our own lands, resources, and histories. It is the responsibility of our families and communities as Stolo people to take care of these things in a respectful way. Please feel free to contact us with further questions about attribution. And if you were to click on that link on the bottom of the label there, it would take you to this next page, which provides some more context about the labels in use on the Scowlitz website. And I really like this paragraph, so I decided to share it with you. It just explains what the labels mean and gives more information about the protocols that they would like you to respect on this site. So it states, TK labels are meant to help people outside of our community understand the importance and significance of our cultural heritage. The labels provide information that is hard to find or missing from the current public record, such as community and family names, what conditions of use are considered appropriate, how to contact relevant family or community members, and how to arrange the right kinds of permissions. They are used to help educate visitors to this website about the rights and responsibilities related to Scowlitz knowledge and cultural heritage. I also wanted to point out the label, the attribution label that's there on the right side. And if you notice, there's a little play button because the community has added audio recordings of their local label names as well as the translations. And so if you go to their website, you can click on that button and hear the translated text. And then I have one more example from the Scowlitz website on the next page. Here is a label, the family label that was customized and applied to the story of Mimu. And this is a story from a specific family, and so that's why they use this label. And the customized text states, in Stolo culture, certain kinds of knowledge are held, taken care of, and shared by certain families. The label text, or the label literally means family. Some information on this website was shared by the families who have the right to hold that knowledge, and it is important to recognize family held knowledge in our culture. This is a really interesting example because in this case, the community actually does hold the rights to the cultural material that is shared on the website. However, they still utilize the labels to guide correct use of that information. And then we have one more example that I'll share from the Passamaquoddy tribe on the next slide. We have a short clip to play for you all.
The Passamaquoddy wax cylinder recordings were made in Calais, Maine in March 1890.
These are songs from our ancestors that haven't been heard for 120, 130 years.
As a matter of fact, the first time I actually listened to the wax cylinders, it really, I was very, very emotional.
These songs were sitting in an archive waiting for us. And the right moment that they came was the right moment that we needed them. Yone-ha, 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 yone-ha. It helps us to take possession of that song back instead of somebody interpreting what that song is and what it means. One of the most powerful things that we've experienced as a community is gifts coming back from our ancestors.
If we think about the traditional knowledge that's being shared as a gift and what the essence of that is and how that's maintained, and then the sorts of protocols that can be used to ensure that it's used in the right sort of way, that's what we see the labels sort of helping us do.
We are still here. It's amazing.
Thanks, Corrie. And so that's just a short clip of our longer video about local context, but you can see the full video on our website. And thank you to Corrie for editing this video for the presentation today. And so this is a great example that we like to share because the previous Scallops example demonstrates the potential of the labels in use within a community. But here's an example of the labels developed in collaboration with an institution to be used on the institutional website, the Library of Congress's site. And so these wax cylinders were the first sound recordings that were created on native land in 1890 in Calais, Maine on Passamaquoddy homelands. And as I mentioned, the wax cylinder recordings are held by the Library of Congress and digitally available on their website. And before this collaboration, it had been 120 years since those recordings were heard by the community. And if we go to the next slide, you can see what the record looked like prior to the collaboration. As you can see, it's pretty bare. There's not a lot of information here. But to the community, these were obviously very significant recordings, and they worked together to add more information about the context. And I'll show in just a moment the updated record for these recordings. So 5 years ago, they were digitally enhanced and restored as part of the Ancestral Voices project, which utilizes emerging digital technologies and innovative approaches to address issues in preservation, co-curation, cultural representation, and intellectual access that are of critical concern for both cultural communities and archival repositories. And by working with tribal communities to determine what is missing from current collections, information, and adding that perspective to catalog records, this effort repositions communities as authorities over their cultural histories. Through this collaboration, Passamaquoddy community members were able to add significant context, translations, information about singers, and cultural authority to the Library of Congress records. And if we go to the next slide, you can see the updated record. There's obviously much more information here that was generously added by the community, and you can see that on the Library of Congress website. And then on the right side, there are 3 labels that were customized by the community and applied to this particular record. And next, Janette will talk about the work that the labels do beyond this public-facing content that we can see on the online record here.
Thanks, Felicia. So this is where the Passamaquoddy and the Library of Congress example really goes far beyond to transform the rights recognition level. And what makes this example so exciting, the TK labels, they're not only at the front-facing level next to the content at the top, but are automatically transferred to the rights advisory field, showing rights to the Passamaquoddy first before the rights of the Peabody Museum. And you can see how that, how each of those rights advisory fields are shown there. The labels are up first, and then it shows the rights of the Peabody Museum. Although the Peabody Museum has the legal rights, Passamaquoddy have cultural authority rights through the labels. You'll see on the next screen, here are the labels at the records level in the 540 data field, transforming the MARC records of collection management systems, specifically here for the library in Dublin Core. So this practice at the records level is a really huge step towards cultural authority for Indigenous communities and helping to decolonise collection management systems. And having a specific traditional knowledge field in the next slide is the JSON package, which is also another example of transforming digital infrastructure. Therefore, this practice of rights recognition, rights advisory, transforming the MARC records and transforming digital infrastructure really is a paradigm shift for institutions. Institutions have to decolonize their collection management systems to take into consideration the cultural authorities of Indigenous communities and having a paradigm shift. This is the work that can be started with institutions today to accept the implementation of the labels. For support, we really recommend joining our Enrich Cultural Institution Working Group, where you can contact Corrie on our email that I'll show at the end, which is support@localcontext.org email, and for the Indigenous Communities Working Group, Felicia, with the same email, support@localcontext.org. So the Passamaquoddy and the Library of Congress is a really brilliant example of how Indigenous cultural authority is upheld within collection management systems at the data level, at the metadata level, for Indigenous cultural material through the labels. I'm going to do a bit of a shift here. In the next slide, I want to take you to an example of an Indigenous community who's adopting their own labels for their collections and digital archives. Here is the Whakatohia iwi in Aotearoa, New Zealand, having a wānanga or workshop with their own tribe on the traditional knowledge labels. Whakatohia are passionate about the protection of their knowledge and their cultural materials, where they knew building a digital nation called Te Ihikaroa was key to their self-determination, past, present, and in the future. So the labels became a comprehensive strategy to build their digital nation, their digital strategy, alongside other initiatives such as their digital library, computer science programming classes for their children, and really having a relationship with museums and universities who have their cultural materials. They first wanted to have a workshop with their tribe, though, on what and why the traditional knowledge labels are really important for them. So at their community level, it is absolutely possible to start looking at a digital strategy. On the next slide, they then started to look at applications through their tribe's advisory board. So then they started to put the people in place of how to customize the labels for themselves and to apply the traditional knowledge labels, and started with a Waikato app and looking at their tribal songs and looking how this Waikato app was going to hold the traditional knowledge labels, who helped them to make that through the computer science department at the University of Waikato. And then they looked at all their digital archives, their libraries, such as their treaty settlement documents, and to look at applying the labels with different material. Majority of this information is within their own systems, so you can't actually see the exact examples. But the process was really important for them, to help them to really understand their relationships with other institutions, museums, libraries that held their cultural materials, to start to establish relationships. It's been a really empowering process for them, and in doing this, they've become really instrumental, as you'll see on the next slide, with other tribes in a peer-to-peer learning environment, which really helps them to do the same, so that we're able to start looking at it from a digital strategy perspective, that help to underpin their digital library and their archives and their education strategy. Then they were able to do a tribal advisory group to help customize the labels, having a wānanga, and then they were able to look at initiatives such as using sign language to teach their children about the traditional knowledge labels, and they became really instrumental in a peer-to-peer learning network with other tribes. On the next slide, the TK labels was one application for whakatōhea, but the next part of the process for them was whakatōhea was to incorporate the biocultural labels, defining which is to define their expectations about appropriate use of biocultural collections and data. These are different types of science and digital sequencing information institutions that collect samples on their territories and in their seas. And the biocultural labels really are similar to the TK labels on how they identify provenance, protocols and permissions and communicate that, but they are easily identifiable with the 3 dots in front of them. So on the next slide, whakatōhea have a mussel farm project in their seas, and samples are taken by researchers to identify the different species. Whakatōhea realised it was important to incorporate both the traditional knowledge labels and the biocultural labels together within the Te Whānau-Ā-Āpanui project. For example, there's the biocultural information and access and benefit sharing with the mussel samples on the right map, but there's the traditional knowledge and songs related to those specific areas on the left map. One map shows one part of the Bay of Plenty, the mussels are collected, and the others show where whakatōhea have their waiata app, their songs of that area. So the traditional knowledge and the biocultural labels can be used together. And this holistical approach to using them together means that we are not only able to apply cultural authority to cultural material in the past that's already been done, but it can be discussed in cultural materials currently happening and materials samples that are going to happen in the future on Indigenous communities' land and territories. So it really helps to look at, though, benefit sharing of biocultural information and data, and the biocultural labels are put next to the metadata that includes anything to do with whakatōhea. If you do have any questions, please put them in the chat. Thank you, Dylan. We will answer your questions shortly. Just to summarise, though, the labels must come from the Indigenous communities themselves, but tools for the institutions and the researchers comes from using the notices. And this is what Corrie will go into next.
Thanks, Janette. So local context started with the labels. It started with collaborating with Indigenous communities to develop them as a tool to reflect their needs and protocols. However, our co-directors realized that non-Indigenous researchers and institutions, they're on their own journey in this work. And so they developed this separate set of tools called notices. And these are used to disclose Indigenous interests, rights, and responsibilities in collections and data. And the notices are also meant to help disperse some of the invisible labor that goes into this work, especially from communities onto staff at these institutions as well as researchers. Institutional staff and researchers are often going to have greater familiarity with what materials they do have. And so we see here the 4 notices that we have, and you'll notice that they are squares instead of the more rectangular labels. And so we describe these in 2 categories, engagement and disclosure. So for the engagement notices, we have open to collaborate and attribution incomplete. And so the open to collaborate indicates a commitment to change and to develop new processes for the care and stewardship of past, present, and future Indigenous collections and data. Since notices can be placed without community consultation, maybe when you're beginning this work, this is where a lot of the institutions start to signal their interest as well as their commitment to the work. The attribution incomplete is used with collections or data that are incomplete, inaccurate, or missing attribution. So this notice is helping to identify what materials need to be updated or corrected by communities of origin. So on the right, there are the two disclosure notices. And so these correspond with the two categories of the labels, TK or traditional knowledge and BC or biocultural knowledge. So the TK notice, if you're using that, you're recognizing that there could be accompanying cultural rights, protocols, responsibilities that need further attention for future sharing and use of the material. If you're using the biocultural notice, you're indicating that there are Indigenous rights and interests around the biodiversity or genetic materials, especially those derived from traditional lands, waters, and territories. So the notices, like the labels, can be placed on a variety of scales, which we'll see in a couple examples that I'll share just momentarily. But the TK and BC notices in particular can be thought of as a placeholder, especially if a community is going to be replacing that notice with a label. So we'll also show you this in the hub. It'll be a little bit clearer. But let's look at some examples of notices in place. So first, we'll look at some notices on historic or cultural collections. This first example is from the Center for Native American and Indigenous Research, or CNARE, at the American Philosophical Society, which is located in Philadelphia. So CNARE works with community-based scholars, knowledge keepers, teachers, and tribal organizations to benefit Indigenous communities in research. So they're using this Open to Collaborate notice, which is on their homepage, if you click the link in our shared doc. So you'll see that this notice is on their homepage, meaning that this notice has applied to their whole department or their whole collection. So all the materials at CNARE have this Open to Collaborate notice on it. And the staff there have said that the notice was really just a visual indicator of already existing policy, and also to really show their commitment to ethical engagement in the return of materials. And so, as you'll see with the other examples that I'm going to share today, the notices are not customized like the labels. So they're going to use the same text, the same icon, and the same name in every instance. So here, I'll read the Open to Collaborate text, and it's going to be the same on the following slides that are using the Open to Collaborate notice. So the text here says, Open to Collaborate, CNARE is committed to the development of new modes of collaboration, engagement, and partnership with Indigenous peoples for the care and stewardship of past and future heritage collections. So I'll go to our next example, and you'll see that it has the same text there, but it's a fairly different situation in that it's at the New York State Museum in the Native American Ethnography collection. And so again, this notice is at the collection level. And so the staff at the New York State Museum, they collaborate with local Indigenous nations. They're also developing a guide for image copyright and use for ethnography collections. And again, this notice is applied to their whole department. So this other example of Open to Collaborate is on Simon Fraser University, which is located in Burnaby, British Columbia. And so this notice is placed on the Northwest Coast Image Archive within Simon Fraser's library. And this is one of the most highly utilized collections within the library. But what they wanted to do with this notice was to acknowledge that there is limited attribution within the collection, and that the institution is committed to working with communities to improve this. And so this next example is at the item level rather than the collection level. And this comes from the Abbey Museum, which is located in Bar Harbor, Maine. and it has a focus on the Wabanaki nations. So the Open to Collaborate notice was added to every entry in the Abby's online database, which is built in the collection software PastPerfect. And in addition, the Attribution Incomplete notice was added to select entries, which you can see here. So the museum has really great community-based practices, but they're using the notices as an invitation to continue to update and improve records and to continue to build better relationships and practices. So now we'll look at just 2 examples of notices in scientific circumstances. So this first example is on Geome, which is an online database used with biological samples and genetic sequences. And so the Open to Collaborate notice you'll see there is at the bottom of the homepage and therefore applied to the whole database. And when you click, this little pop-up appears. But also in Geome, which you can see on this next slide, notices are available to be applied to the information that researchers are adding to the database. So what you see circled here is the option to add a traditional knowledge notice. And on the right, it tells a little bit more about what that is for researchers who might not know. And this last example is the first example of a biocultural notice in place. It's placed in this genetic database called GDB, and it's been placed on the genetic sequence of the European blueberry. And this notice was placed by researchers to indicate the ongoing collaboration that they have in Norway with the Sami who are indigenous to Sapmi. And so after all those examples, Felicia and I want to dive into a demonstration of the Local Context Hub and really show you what the workflow and process could be like. So I'm going to stop sharing this and I will switch to sharing the hub. Just one moment. And again, please feel free to put your questions in the chat now or later. We'll look forward to answering them. Just one moment. All right. So I will share this. Looks good, Felicia?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to sign in and Felicia is going to tell you a little bit about what we're seeing.
Great. Thanks, Corrie. And this is not the live hub site. This is our sandbox site where folks can test out the workflow, create a test account. And if you're interested in accessing this site, just send us an email at the address that we'll share at the end. But this is the dashboard. This is what you'll see when you log into the hub. This is Corrie's dashboard. And so you can see all of the accounts that she is a member of. There are 3 account types. There is a researcher account, which can be used to create projects and generate notices. There is a community account, which is it should be utilized by Indigenous communities and can be used to create projects and customize and apply labels. And then there is also the institution account, which similar to the researcher account can be used to create projects and customize and generate notices. And within the hub, researchers and institutions can collaborate with communities on projects to apply a label to a project if that is the desire of the community. And something to note here is that an individual can be a member of multiple accounts and multiple account types. As you can see here, Corrie has a researcher account. She's a member of a few different communities and a few different institutions. And this is a test site. So these are, of course, all test accounts that we are using here today. And then I also wanted to show you all the local context registry, which can be accessed on the top right. And so this is a list of all of the accounts that are registered on the hub. If you create an account and you aren't sure if your community or institution already has an account in the hub, you can click on the registry after you have registered your personal account, and then you can send a request to join if they are already on here, or you can create the new account. You can also click on that contact us button if you are interested in getting in touch with someone, an institution, community, or researcher that is on the hub. So that's a really useful function that we just wanted to share. And then I will turn it over to Corrie to share a bit about the institutional account.
Yeah, so we're going to go back to my profile dashboard, and I'm going to go into this practice account called Museum of Science. So I'm just going to do that by clicking on the card that we see here. And so once we're here, we've landed on the institution account page. And so I'm going to go through the different parts of this account page. Right now, we've landed on projects, and we'll talk a little bit about projects, a lot about projects very shortly. But this is a nice place to see a summary of what projects you have on the hub. If we go to the next page here, notices, this has all the notices that are available to an institution account, which is all 4 of them. And what you can find here is a reference to why you might use this notice, as well as the notice text. And you can also download the Open to Collaborate notice right here. On this next page, it's called Connections. This is a really nice place to see the project information, but in a differently organized. So here are the 2 communities that I've connected with in this institution account. And if I go to show more under Southwest, I can see all the projects that I've done with Southwest community, which is a really nice reference. And it's differently organized on the project page. And then on this last page is members. And so there's a couple different roles within the hub. You can be an administrator, an editor, or a viewer. And so as the account creator and an administrator, I can change people's roles if I wanted to promote or demote anyone, as well as if I wanted to remove members. Now I can also add new members here in addition to folks requesting to join. So there's a couple different ways that you could be added to an account. But for now, I'm going to go back to the projects page. And we're going to create a practice project together. So you can see the type of information that we are looking for, as well as the process of sharing with a community. So I'm going to create a project. So this is going to bring us to a form where we have to enter some information. But first, just to tell you a little bit about what a local context project is. As we've seen today, notices and labels can be applied to a variety of activities at a range of scales. And so the project is describing the context that you're applying a notice or a label to. So as Felicia mentioned, any of the account types can create a project, but we're going to demonstrate today on an institutional account for that process. So what we're going to enter, as you'll see, is some basic summary information about the context that we want to apply a notice to. We don't need to enter everything we know. There's a space that we can link out to an external database so that all the information there is available. And so something that might be helpful as you're creating a project is to think about the audience, which is communities, communities that you might wish to engage with and who have the rights, responsibilities, and interests in the material, the information, or the data. So first, as an institution, we're going to select which notices we'd like to apply to the project. And so as you can see, you can choose to apply all of these notices or just one. I'm going to choose the traditional knowledge and attribution incomplete for today. And then we scroll on down And our next information will be what type of project this is. So you should be able to see this drop down. Great. And these are the different options that we have. Your project could be an item, a collection, samples, expedition, publication, exhibition. And if your project doesn't fit in any of those categories, we also have this other where you can type in what your project is. Today, though, I'm going to choose item. And we're going to actually use information from the Passamaquoddy wax cylinder example that Felicia shared earlier, just so you have an idea of what type of information we're entering about this item. So first, again, we're going to enter some very summary basic information. So we're going to give our project a clear title of what it is we're talking about. And so I've just copied the name of the 2 songs on this particular wax cylinder. And then I'm going to enter a very short paragraph that you can see here that very briefly says what this project is. It's a wax cylinder with 2 songs on it. And it also gives the dates of when it was recorded. For project link, this is where I'm going to put the Library of Congress database link. And so once Felicia in her community account receives this, she'll be able to click on that and see all the information that's available. Next, we're just going to enter some project contacts. So I'm going to put myself as the project contact. Maybe the person who's creating the project isn't the contact that you would like people to email with questions. In this case, it will be. For project contributors, this is for institutions and researchers that are already registered on the hub. So I'm going to find Janette and add Janette as a project contributor. And then if there was somebody I was working with on this project that wasn't on the hub yet, I could add them here with their name and email. Now this last section with information is some additional information that might already exist about the item that we are talking about. In this case, we do have a provider's project ID. So this is going to be, in the case of a museum, like the accession number. And so the Library of Congress has assigned a couple different numbers, which I've copied here. In this case, we don't have a GUID or a DOI. Those are 2 different permalink permanent identifiers that exist for certain types of information. But we do have a recommended citation, so I'm going to paste that in here. So all this information is going to appear to Felicia in the community account once she receives this. And now this last bit is to select the privacy level of the project. So I'm going to leave it as public and I'm going to press save. And then our last step after we've created is to share the project. So scrolling in my list here, and here is the project that we've just created. If I press show more, this notify communities button appears. And so I'm going to click on that and share with Felicia. So here in this dialog, this has all the communities that are registered on the test hub again, in this case. I'm going to send it to Southwest community. You can send it to multiple communities using this dialog. But I'm going to write just a very quick message here. We have a messaging system built in, and this will appear with the project information. So I'm going to send, and then I'm going to let Felicia share her screen and show you what the community sees when they receive this project.
Thanks, Corrie. Let me just get my screen share set up. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so here we are on my dashboard. Whoops, as you can see, it looks nearly identical to Corrie's. You can see all of the accounts that I'm a member of here. Though I'm going to go into the Southwest Community Test account, which is where Corrie sent the project. All right, and before we go into that project, I just wanted to point out some of the different features of the community account. As you'll see, it looks very similar to the institution account. The key difference here is that there is this labels tab instead of the notice tab. So I'll just go in there and speak a little bit about the label customization process. So here you can see all of the labels that have been customized within this account. The hub is set up to be really collaborative, and a label can only be customized if there are 2 or more members within a community account. And so one member customizes the label, and then another member must approve it before it can be applied to a project. So as you can see, these 2 that say waiting for approval, I think I created these, and then Corrie can go in and approve them. And then there's this one that says review for approval. Corrie created this label or customized it, and I can review this and approve it for use. A community can also view their labels in a PDF or download that PDF with all of their customized text and names. If you scroll down, there is some more information about the traditional knowledge labels. You can link out to our website here. Each of the labels is available here with the information about why you might use that label, as well as the template text. And then that same information is available here for the biocultural labels. And I just wanted to show you really quickly what it looks like if you click customize a label. As I mentioned earlier, communities can customize the label text here. So this can be completely customized. You can also add a translation. There's a box here for you to list the language that the text has been translated to. Or if you want to just make the description in that other language, you can just state the language there. And then you can also add the translation in addition to the customized text down here. We also added a new feature recently to upload an audio file, as you saw with the Scowlets label, where they had the option to play the label text in their traditional language. You can upload that file here. And you can also save it as a draft if you need to come back and finish that later. So I'll go back to the projects tab, and we can apply one of the labels that have already been customized. All right, here are all the projects that have been sent to this community. Many of them already have labels applied, and here is the one that was sent over by Corrie. So if I click show more, there's all of the information, but I can also click on this view button and it will take me to the full project details, which can be downloaded using this button here, the top right. If you go to this project page, you'll also see the local context unique identifier, which can be used with the API to display the labels on your website or on your database. There's also that unique ID here that is from the Library of Congress website, which can also easily be copied. And then here are the notices with the notice text, which of course is not customized. And then I can go back and let Corrie know my decision as to whether or not I'm going to apply a label. Also, just to point out really quickly, here's this project link button, which will take us to the Library of Congress website. That's the link that Corrie included in the project field earlier. So show more. There is this project decision dropdown. I can let the institution know if I've seen it, but maybe haven't decided whether or not to apply a label. can let the institution know that, yes, we would like to apply labels, but we're still making a decision. Or I can let them know that we don't have any plans to apply labels to this particular project. Here's that built-in chat function that Corrie shared earlier, so I can respond to her message here, ask any questions. It's very convenient, easy to use. And then I can also apply labels using this button here. And so here are those customized labels that I showed you all earlier. And even though Corrie sent this TK notice here, I always like to point out that the community has the option to also apply BC labels. It's not determined by the notice that is sent by the institution. And so for now, I'm just going to select a few TK labels. So outreach, attribution, verified. And once you select them, it will show the customized and translated text, the local name, just to confirm before you apply them to the project. So I'll click apply. All right, and then here is that project. And as you can see, the notices have been swapped out with the labels that we applied. I will stop sharing now. Did I miss anything, Corrie?
No, I'm just gonna share our last slide, which is our contact information. Janette, do you want to start us off on this? And then we'll get into Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you, Corrie and Felicia. Thanks to everyone for listening to our presentation. You can contact us on support@localcontext.org, email there, where you will get all three of us. It will go to our support system and all of us will see any of your questions. Corrie, did you want to talk about Enrich?
Felicia's going to.
Felicia.
Yes, thank you. As you can see here, we have our two Enrich working groups, which Janette also mentioned earlier. We have one specifically for cultural institutions, and if in our document we have a link to join. You can also send us an email at support@localcontext. We also have an Indigenous community working group. Unfortunately, we don't have a link for that one, but you can also just email us at that support address and we will get you signed up for whichever group you're interested in.
And just very lastly, we wanted to share that we are on social media, where we like to post about upcoming presentations like this one, as well as updates about local context. So we are on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So thank you very much, and we'll be happy to take questions now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation and enormously informative. And so thank you so much for your time. So now we have opened the floor up to questions, and there's been a couple of people who have asked already. So I'm going to start with Dylan's question. Do you have staff available to help facilitate moderation when connecting with First Nations or Indigenous communities? And is there a guideline to create these traditional knowledge labels with these communities?
Yes, I can speak to that. So Corrie and I are the staff available to help facilitate. If you are interested in either meeting with us to talk about how your institution might collaborate with communities, we're happy to help. But also if there are communities that you'd like to work with, we're also happy to meet directly with them to get them set up on the hub and provide an intro to the labels and notices. And then as far as a guideline, we have some FAQs on our website, and we also have a number of different external resources that we'll share with folks as far as collaboration with communities. But I would say that our website is a great place to start. And again, we're happy to meet with anyone one-on-one to discuss what that process might look like.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And then the next question is there a verification process for institutions developing accounts?
There is. So there is a process. You register as an individual and then you apply to create an account. And that is reviewed by us. And we like to verify that you are a real person. And once that is all set, then you are verified on the hub.
Wonderful. It just roughly how long does that take?
We aim to do that within 24 hours, working hours, maybe 48 if it's, you know, a very busy day.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so one more question that we have here, and I encourage anybody who has additional questions to ask them now and put them in the chat. And so the next question we have here is, how long does a TK label project take? I work at an archive, and we received 1,000 Indigenous collections and made records. We're trying to launch the project with about 50 approved records.
I can do that if you like.
Yeah.
What we do suggest, though, is starting off with a project, a pilot project with one community. Relationship building is still outside of the hub, and that you work on relationship building with that community so that they understand what they're going to be receiving through the hub. So the timing can take as little or as long as it takes. If you go into the hub expecting sort of that you're going to just notify communities, it can take very long. It can take a very long time to get your labels, but relationship building is still outside the hub, is still a process that needs to be considered if you are to communicate with them. And that they already know that the notices and the projects are already coming their way beforehand. So we do recommend that you do that process outside, however long that takes. I can understand from an archives perspective that you have thousands, but we do ask that you start with with one pilot and have that going through the hub to understand how the hub works, and to have the conversations with Felicia and with Corrie as you go through. So it can take as long or as less as it can take, depending on the relationship building that's done with the communities.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have anything to add? Okay. All right. So I have a question. So what are the next development plans or goals for the hub?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about that. As you can see, the hub is, it's a work in progress. We really welcome feedback at this time because it is actively being developed. But we are working on some really cool features that should be implemented within the next year. There's going to be a mapping or a GIS component that we're working on. We're hoping to be able to add some other forms of media, images to projects. So once we hear that there is an interest in new features, at that point, we are able to consider when it should be added to the hub and if it should be added to the hub. So just some exciting things down the track.
Wonderful. Anybody else? Okay. There's an additional question in the chat, which is, do you have individual training sessions?
I can talk to that. And yes, we do have individual training sessions specific to communities, specific to Indigenous, specific to institutions and researchers. Our first training will be starting around August, and we hope that you could get onto the hub first of all and check that out first. But the training is really to understand from the intellectual and cultural property perspective, Indigenous data sovereignty, all the way through to relationships, how communities can really start looking at their advisory council, where they would like to apply their labels for themselves first, as well as with other institutions. Definitely, there is a lot of training that we are doing, but we're starting that within August of this year. Felicia and Corrie, is there anything you want to add to that?
Just that we do, as Felicia mentioned, there are some resources on our website right now. We are working on developing more, including an online learning platform that will take you through some of the topics that Janette just talked about, Indigenous intellectual property. So that is coming soon. It is a work in progress.
And also, I just wanted to add that if you or like a small group of members from your team or your community just want to have an informal session with Corrie and we are happy to meet with you one-on-one or in a small group to do a brief training on the hub.
Yeah, so just email us anytime.
Thank you. There's one more question. Actually, there's two questions here. So what is the current reach of the hub?
So the hub, we have launched about 6 months ago, I believe, at this point. So it is fairly new. We have seen about 100 users join us, and they really are located around the globe, which has been fantastic to see. And as we have presentations like this one, we get to meet new people. So in that way, the reach is pretty exponential, as well as when communities are joining and telling other communities about the labels and the potential there. Felicia, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I would say that I think there are a number of communities who are already using the labels. And so right now we're working on a process to migrate their labels onto the hub and make it easier to access them and apply to future projects. So for sure, it's a work in progress and the community is only growing.
Wonderful, thank you. I think that you've actually, Felicia, you've just touched on the second part, which is the use of the labels. Thank you. Okay, perfect. So does anybody have any additional questions before we wrap up? Okay. So somebody's asking, so in terms of data sovereignty, where would this data be stored, and would this information be accessible only between the parties and the Indigenous would it be accessible only between the parties the Indigenous communities agree upon? And then further elaboration is wanting to protect and create a safe environment for First Nations to feel that they can trust institutions that have in the past caused trauma.
This is a really good question. Thanks a lot, Dylan. It is really important that the data is Indigenous data sovereignty is upheld. We do have that within the hub, and that the data is stored in New York University in relationship to how the hub, but we do want to reiterate, we do not take the data from the collection management systems. It's just the project that's held within, it's just the project itself of the notices of the projects and of the labels that is within the hub, not what the labels and the notices are related to. That still remains within the institutions, and it still is the responsibilities of the institutions to look at their Indigenous data sovereignty around that information. But what we do have is the connection between the notices, the projects, and the labels, which is so we're not holding all of that information that is their traditional knowledge, their cultural material that's still with the institution, and therefore we ask institutions to look at their Indigenous data sovereignty in relation to that. Corrie and Felicia, did you want to add anything in relation to that?
I'll just add that thinking back to the registry that I shared earlier, you have to be admitted to a community, and so none of that information is publicly viewable unless a community has invited you to join their account. Additionally, communities are able to collaborate on projects internally. If they wanted to work on a project with private or sensitive information, that can happen within their account, and it doesn't have to be viewed or shared externally.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So does Anybody have any? My cat is coming in to check out what's going on.
So cute.
The
I do see a question in the Q&A, Stephen. Would you mind if we answer
Q&A.
that one?
Okay, yeah, there we go. Sorry.
No.
So I work some communities using Mukurtu. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that. This sounds similar. What is the relationship with that platform, and could you elaborate a bit about this?
I
You said
can
it pretty good, actually. So go ahead, Janette.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. That's a really good point. So Kim and Kim Christian, she is the director of Mukurtu. So Kim Christian and Jane, together with Local Context, had Mukurtu as the collections system, where it's for Indigenous communities. Mukurtu then has all of their collections and their items within Mukurtu, and Mukurtu connects with the hub in order for the communities to put their labels on their collection management systems and all the information. So you were able to see that relationship in one of our examples, which is with the Stolong Nation. Did you want to add?
Yes,
Sorry.
I'll just add that Corrie and I are actually meeting with their team on Thursday to talk about how we can support the Mukurtu communities in getting their labels onto the hub. And so we're actively working with them in sort of bridging the two platforms. Thanks for that question.
And it will be even more integrated in the next version of Mukurtu, which is forthcoming. There's going to be an automatic connection with the local context hub. So thank you for that question.
Wonderful.